Okay, welcome everybody to the Career Readiness Video Podcast. We're back with a new episode where we're going to be discussing accessibility in your career readiness and in the workplace. My name is Chelsea Miyashiro, and I'm one of the advisors here in the Career and Life Design Center at UCM. I have Kendall and Katie. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Katie, have her introduce herself, and then we'll kind of go ahead and get started here.
Wonderful. Well, I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you, Chelsea, for inviting me. I am Katie Fields. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the College Outreach Coordinator at Starkloff Disability Institute. Starkloff Disability Institute is a nonprofit located in St. Louis, Missouri, and our focus really is on bridging the employment gap for disabled professionals. And I coordinate Access U, which is a free career development program for college students with disabilities, focused on the unique things, unique barriers and challenges they face in their career search, like how to talk about your disability with an employer, how to request accommodations, on top of the general career development support that a traditional career office would provide. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome.
So my name is Kendall Rieger. Kind of like Chelsea said, I do work with the Career Services Center here at the University of Central Missouri. I'm going on about 3 semesters as kind of a student employee. I'm currently working on wrapping up my Bachelor's of Science in Political Science. I graduate in December of this year. So I'm just kind of on here to provide some good student perspectives and hopefully kind of provide some insight and gather a little bit of information to kind of help me with my role as a peer mentor and peer advisor with the Career Services Center. So without further ado, I guess we'll just go ahead and kind of get started. So,
Kendall, you want to kick it off?
Yeah. Katie, why don't you just kind of one of my first questions, tell me a little bit more about kind of your role at Starkloff and why are you passionate about this aspect of the work?
So great question. And this kind of goes back some years. When I was in college, I joined my career services office as a student career advisor. And in that role, I was doing resume and cover letter reviews with students. I was learning a lot about career development. And I realized that there are few resources for disabled students who, need a little support when it comes to navigating some of the challenges and barriers they face. And I was helping to host one of our career fairs. I had looked at all of the employers that were listed, and I saw Starkloff Disability Institute. I learned that they were a nonprofit, saw that they had no internships, but I was like, they do disability work. That sounds interesting. I'm going to go see if I can volunteer. So I went up to their table and I spoke with one of their employees. We got to know each other. I got to learn more about their mission. And I had asked if I could volunteer with them. And she had said, well, knowing you've got a marketing background, let's build an internship for you. And I was like, what? That's so cool. And that's the power of networking. So just know that, students. But I joined their team as an intern, and it was spending time with their team, which is comprised, I think 80% of our team are disabled individuals. Spending time with them helped me to embrace my own disability identity as somebody with multiple invisible disabilities, including mental health, ADHD. I have GI issues, scoliosis. Because I didn't navigate as many barriers as other folks, because inaccessibility didn't impact me as much, I never viewed myself as disabled. And so coming into this space, being around the disability community helped me to find pride in my own identity. I got to learn more about disability employment and the things that disabled job seekers need to focus on. And when it came time for me to graduate from college in 2019, Starkloff reached out and said, hey, we want to jumpstart this new college career development program, and we think you'd be the right person for it. Are you in? And I was so excited. And so that's kind of how Access U, the program I run, came to fruition. And that program is really tailored to meet the needs of college students who have busy schedules, who are balancing a lot of classes, who might not be able to prioritize a 10-week career development course. We try to make it as flexible for them as possible, and as individualized as they need it to be to really meet their needs and their individual goals. But we love that we can offer it at no cost. And I think what's really cool about it is, we provide career development support. We work with students on interviewing. We help them create a disability discussion plan. But then on the flip side, we have social opportunities where we bring disabled students together to talk about their job search, how college is going, the challenges they face, because so often disabled college students are very isolated, and they don't often have a community on their campus. And we see that as we promote disability pride, and we push self-advocacy, our students are more successful in their job search. The more confidence they have in themselves, the better their job search goes. So that's a little bit about my role, kind of how I got to where I am. And I think my passion comes from my own disability experience and just the incredible students that I serve.
I have like a two-part question. They're like
Sure.
related, but not. But so you mentioned Access U, which I'm so grateful that you mentioned it. Do we have to be connected to StarCloth, or can UCM students get involved with it if we are available to do that? How can our students get involved with it?
Absolutely. So the only qualifiers for somebody to join Access U is, are you a current college student? And are you disabled? Those are really the two things we look for. You can be anywhere in the US. Now that the pandemic has hit, we have kind of pivoted into this virtual space, and that's meant that we can serve people outside of St. Louis, which is great. A student can connect with you, Chelsea, and have you make an introduction between that student and me. I will share my email address with you to put in the episode notes. That's kfields@starcloth.org. Or you can visit accessu.org. And a student can just fill out our contact form, and I'll be reaching out to them very shortly once they submit that. It's super easy to get involved. And once a student connects with me, we typically have a short welcome meeting just to go over what the program can provide and to learn a little bit more about what that student's goals are. I hope that answered your question.
It did, and I think that's so important in celebrating that, like, disability pride and really establishing that community, because like if they can, whenever I connect with a student, offer that service or that connection to you, I think it's so important to have them know that this is a community surrounded by people that you can get to know and support each other with. But with that kind of connects to my next question of just like, you talked around it, disability, and it's like the visible and invisible disability. So can you talk a little bit more about what is a disability?
Sure.
To clarify for our students and others?
Yeah, that's another great question. So there's a couple of different definitions. I know that the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, which was passed in 1990 and went into effect in 92. It defines disability very broadly because it wants to be all encompassing. And it says disability is an impairment that impacts one or more major life activities. I view disability instead as natural, neutral, normal variations in the body. These can be psychological, physical, sensory, intellectual variations. And these variations or impairments become disability when we're in an environment that is not accessible. So for instance, without my glasses, I cannot see, right? I have very, very poor vision, but the moment I have glasses, I'm given access, I'm no longer disabled. If an individual who uses a wheelchair encounters a set of stairs that they can't use, they're disabled, right? But if a ramp is made available, they now have the access needed to enter that space. So really disability, I believe, is a result of an environment that has not prioritized the needs of disabled people or really allowed them to be at the table when making decisions. So that's kind of how I define disability. For a long time, it's been viewed through a medical lens where, disability is this thing that's very individual. It has to be treated or fixed or cured before somebody can participate in society. And we at StarCloth Disability Institute really don't agree with that. We and the wider disability community promote the social model of disability, which basically is kind of what I've shared. Disability is a social identity. And the remedy to disability isn't these individual treatments or cures, it's creating a more accessible environment so that all people have access.
That's so powerful. Absolutely. I think that goes
And
along with a lot of that pride piece too and community
Yeah,
building.
absolutely. Yes, completely. And it takes the focus, when we focus on disability being an individual's problem and something that needs to be fixed or cured, it takes all of the responsibility away from society. Responsibility to become more accessible, more inclusive, more welcoming. And instead it puts it on that individual person. And so I think that's kind of why the social model is so powerful. And a lot of people don't know that. So that's why I'm always excited for opportunities like this to just share what I've learned, because I certainly didn't understand any of this until I really, got involved deep into this community. So I'm always excited to talk about this. And if any students ever have questions or want to talk about it more, I'm open and happy to do that.
And that kind of leads me to kind of another question. So if you did have a student who was maybe just feeling a little bit insecure, or they're just kind of uncertain about taking advantage of resources, or kind of the next steps to take when it comes to either going into a career or just kind of daily, being a college student, what kind of advice would you offer to that kind of student?
Sure. So first and foremost, I think if a student can come to terms with their disability identity and find pride in that identity, it's going to make every other decision they have to make moving forward a lot easier. Nothing's ever easy, of course, but I think if you know your strengths and you know the unique mindset and experiences you've had as a disabled individual, and you know how to translate that into skills that an employer is looking for, you're going to find success much more easily than if you're kind of feeling shame about your disability. So one piece of advice right off the bat is spend more time with disabled people. Find your community. It can be uncomfortable at first, but I know for me, once I joined that community and started spending time with disabled people, all of my my fears and concerns and judgments and misconceptions, they all went away. And it was so easy for me to then accept my identity. So I think finding a sense of community with folks that are like you, it can feel a little weird, but I really recommend doing it. I think that really helps to build that sense of pride. Additionally, I think it's really important that students recognize that accommodations, whether those are academic, whether those are in the workplace, these are things that level the playing field and create access. They are not an unfair advantage. And I think so many folks are unwilling to utilize resources that are available to them because they feel like they have this unfair advantage, and that's just not true. So I really encourage students to take advantage of any resource that's available to them. Because, with the lack of access, that's kind of why these things exist. If we lived in a perfect, accessible world, sure, we might not need accommodations, but we're not there yet. So students shouldn't, feel bad about using those. There should be no shame in that. Two more things. I also think students should know their rights and responsibilities under the ADA. I think that is so important when it comes to looking for a job. You've got to know, what are employers allowed to ask you? How does that accommodations process typically work? What happens if I do feel like I'm being discriminated against? I think preparing yourself with that information kind of helps that process to move more smoothly. And then finally, I think identifying inclusive employers is going to be a key part of finding success in your job search. You want to be able to bring your whole self to work every day. And that means finding an employer who recognizes and celebrates your unique identity and the talents you bring. So those are just a couple pieces of advice I have.
Awesome. So especially with the last two of those, do you have any quick places that students can look and research and educate themselves on their own to kind of build that advocacy and to know, okay, so where am I supposed to know my rights and those different things?
Yeah.
Ask those questions of employers to know so they don't get that in that tough spot.
That's a fabulous question. So one, of course, shameless plug, Access U. We host workshops on discussing disability with an employer, and we do when we start those workshops, we always go through, okay, what are your rights under the ADA? What can an employer ask you? What can't they ask you? Where do you go when you're encountering discrimination? Those are things we touch on. Additionally, Job Accommodation Network, it's askjan.org. They are an incredible free confidential resource that provides information on accommodations, how to go about discussing your disability with an employer, but also what are your rights under the ADA. And so I think Ask Jan is a really fabulous resource. And then the Department of Labor, they have the EEOC and the OFCCP. I gotta remember what these stand for. So Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs is the OFCCP. They are the ones that are going to handle disability discrimination for government contractors and subcontractors. And then the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, also handles disability discrimination. So if students just search those and look for disability rights or ADA rights, those offices are going to have information and resources on their website where students can learn.
And then for accessibility on campus, we have an Office of Accessibility. So for any students, even if it's just you're struggling with mental health, and that's very important. It doesn't have to be a physical disability. It can be the invisible, like Katie talked about. You can advocate for yourself, and they will work with any faculty staff that you have on campus, your programs, different things in order to get accommodations to help you be successful here at the university. So. Kendall, do you have a sidebar question? As far as I have another question. So I'm wondering how can, like, whether a student is in a class and they notice that someone has had accommodations or those different things, or even if they're at work and they don't necessarily identify with being disabled or being in the disabled community, how can they be an ally and be an advocate for those other students or coworkers that they have?
Sure, that's a great question. And I think it involves centering disabled voices. So using the power that you have to make sure that disabled people are given the opportunity to speak about their experiences, that they get to be involved in decision-making processes. I think it also requires fighting for accessibility. So recognizing when an environment isn't accessible and maybe bringing that up. If you hear somebody using language that is, not appropriate or is discriminatory, being willing to educate people, kindly, because people don't always know what's appropriate and what's not. There's so much language that we have just, it's been said time and time again from so long ago that like we don't even think of what it actually means. And so I think being able to help people, teach people, so often it's up to disabled people to do that educating, and it can get really tiring. And so I think for allies, being willing to call out stuff when you see it and being willing to educate people is a really big part of it. And then if a disability group doesn't exist, say you're on campus and a disability student group doesn't exist, or if you're in the workplace and there's no, employee disability group or ERG or affinity group, find people that can come together to build that space, because there's power in numbers. And if, a disabled person here or there, is facing discrimination, but they don't feel like they have support or a group to turn to, they might stay quiet about it. And so I think creating a space where they can come together and feel more open about expressing those grievances, that's what really creates change. So those are a couple of recommendations I have. And I think really the biggest thing you can do is keep learning, keep engaging with disabled people, learn from their experiences, consume media that is a good, honest representation of disability. Crip Camp on Netflix. I'm going to push that for everybody. I think everyone should watch that. Just continue to educate yourself.
And you might have already kind of touched on this, but I kind of want to bring it back around maybe. So let's say a student wanted to do some research on disability friendly or inclusive employers. Is there any way you'd recommend kind of going about that process?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that I would consider. It can be more challenging because the information isn't always readily available, but some of the steps I encourage students to take is look for government contractors and subcontractors or the federal government. So the Rehab Act of 1973, one of their sections it didn't have teeth in it until 2014, but in 2014, government contractors and subcontractors had to start working toward a 7% goal of their workforce being disabled individuals. And so these organizations have kind of led the movement to bring more disabled people into the workforce. Many other companies are now following suit, which is fabulous. Disability is being recognized as a part of DE&I, which is great. But I would say the government contractors and subcontractors tend to be some of the most welcoming because they're really, really excited to welcome disabled people into the workforce. I recommend, visiting a company's careers page and their DE&I page to see, hey, is disability even listed? When I'm on their careers page, is there a button where I can push to request an accommodation for the application process? Is their website accessible? I work with blind students who use screen readers, and I've engaged with a student who wanted to apply for a position but couldn't even get through the online job portal. And it made that student wonder, should I really be applying here if I can't even apply? Like, are they going to welcome me? So I think kind of doing some of that research on your own can help you to recognize who recognizes disability as a unique part of diversity and who isn't really considering it. I also think, I mentioned employee resource groups, ERGs. Look for organizations that have some type of disability group already set up, because typically they're going to be more inclusive and more welcoming. I also think that, at least here in St. Louis, the disability community is huge, but it's really small. We talk to one another. I can reach out to several of my friends and say, hey, where do you think people, what companies might not be as inclusive or discriminatory? And they'll start naming them. Or which companies have been most inclusive to you? And they'll start naming them. So I think being involved in your local disability community and just kind of learning from their insights is another good way to know where you might be most accepted and welcomed. I hope that answered your question, Kendall.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, I love the points you made, because that really goes back to, when I think of our service, our center here at the University of Central Missouri, a lot of the things we encourage is, to have that aspect of curiosity and to have that aspect of, wanting to go and do more research into companies and things like that. And, your story was very similar to that. You had an interest, and then you looked into it, and then there were opportunities available you didn't know existed. So I think that really ties into a lot of the things we do here at the Career Services Center. So I absolutely love that.
Oh, one more thing. I forgot to mention this, and I just want to say it too. The Disability Equality Index. Students can look that up. Companies will choose to kind of participate in this metric that scores them based on their disability inclusion efforts. And it lists some of the top scoring companies, and it shows you where certain companies place. Now, these tend to be big corporations, so they might not always be in our area, but I still think with remote work, with opportunities to kind of work for, maybe you're in Missouri, but you could work somewhere in California remotely. It's worth checking out the Disability Equality Index just to see who those top companies are and to see kind of the metrics that they're scoring these companies with, because that'll give you an idea of what you should be looking for in companies that might not be on this list, but, efforts that they might be working toward.
I think that's so helpful to see, just because even if the companies that they're looking for to maybe see if this is a resource that they've utilized to score themselves, they can have those conversations with employers and ask those questions of like, how would you interpret some of these things in order to see and feel out if they are a right fit for that company, even to pursue on their own. Because I think even before you get into interview processes, I think it's perfect, like Kendall even mentioned, and you talked about, Katie, too, like being curious, asking those questions, advocating for yourself in these spaces. Because sometimes it takes, no one's even asked the questions of these employers for them to even think about these things, that you might be that person that can then pave the way for others and even set precedence for yourself. So it's so important. But do you have other questions, Kendall? I know you had a few, like, I want to ask you.
I don't think so. I think you covered a lot of good information, and you covered a lot of the questions that I had. So yeah, this has been an awesome, I've gotten a lot more information than I ever thought I would. So that's really awesome.
I'm awfully chatty, so it's me, not you.
So Katie, do you have any other resources or tips or other things that you want to share as we kind of close out this episode and kind of part ways here?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to invite students to visit accessu, accessu.org, to learn more about getting involved in the Access U program, to get some additional support. I also want to share, just in case any recent graduates or alumni listen to this podcast, we also at Starkloff have 10-week courses we provide for free to professionals with disabilities who are disabled job seekers looking to advance their career or maybe looking for their first job. These courses are really incredible because they do a deep dive into all of the career development pieces necessary to become a competitive job seeker. And one thing that's really cool about all of our programming is we at Starkloff have built incredible relationships with companies in and around St. Louis, and kind of now across the country, who are committed to hiring disabled individuals. And so we have HR experts from these companies like Nestle Purina and Boeing, Centene, Bayer, come in, engage with our candidates, share their insights about, hiring trends and what our folks can do to really stand out. And it's one thing if we as a career advisor say it to them, but when it's coming straight from the company, it really sticks. So I think that the courses we offer are really valuable. So I'm going to encourage any recent grads or alums who are disabled and are looking for work, check out starkloffworks.org. That's STARKLOFF works, WORKS.org. That way you'll learn a little bit more about our courses. So for Access U, we'll serve you, typically 3 months past graduation. If you haven't found work at that point, we'll encourage you to join the Starkloff Career Academy, which is that adult program. And I just want folks to know that at Starkloff Disability Institute, there's always a home for you. Our services never end until you say, hey, I'm done. We're going to be there as a resource for you throughout your entire career journey. So I really encourage folks to check us out. I also want to share that if folks are interested in learning more about disability justice, I think SINS Invalid, SINS Invalid, INVALID.org, shares some really good information about like the framework of disability justice. That's where the disability rights movement is heading. And so I think if folks are wanting to learn more about it, that is a really good place to start. And my last piece of advice is, again, this is probably one of the first things I said, find pride in your identity, own your identity. If you go to an employer and talk about your disability with shame, and you talk about your disability as a weakness, it's likely that employer is going to respond the same way because typically they're not going to be as familiar about disability as you are. But if you go to an employer and you have pride in your disability identity, and you can point out the unique strengths, insights, abilities you have because of it, it's going to make you stand out as a stronger candidate. And I think that employer is going to follow suit. So, and if that sounds challenging, that's okay. It takes time to kind of get there, but just know that Access U is here to support you through that journey. Chelsea's been an incredible ally and advocate too. So I know that she's more than willing to help. But whatever we can do to support you in this journey, we're happy to. And thank you again to the UCM Career Services team so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this information with your students.
Oh, that was so nice. And I love how you talked about how you're there to support and you always have a home there. I think that kind of really aligns with a lot of the stuff that we do in our center as well, is that even when you graduate, and even if you're like, I moved to Switzerland and I just am not a US person no more, we can always meet with you about your career and life goals and how you navigate those different things and help you on those journeys for sure. But unless you have other questions for us, Katie, thank you so much for being on and all your impactful words and things like that. It was a pleasure talking with you and Kendall today.
It really was a pleasure. And just students, if you have questions or just want to talk, don't hesitate to reach out. My email address, in case anybody wants to get in contact with me, KFIELDS@starkloff, STARKLOFF.org. Or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search my name and I'll come up.
Okay, well, that's all we have today. But again, it was a pleasure, Katie. It was so good to see you and to have this chat. I hope the students enjoy and resonate with this. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, really feel free to reach out to Katie, reach out to myself, Kendall as well, while he's still here because he's graduating in December. But he will be doing great things post-grad, of course, and I'm sure he'll stay connected.
I plan on it. I plan on it all the way. So it was very nice to meet you, Katie, and I really enjoyed it.
Great to meet you too, Kendall.
All right. Thanks, everyone.